This story is titled, Husband Secretly Took His Ex on Our Honeymoon Trip, Thinking I'd Never Find Out. But the hotel upgraded him to the honeymoon suite and sent me a thank you email. Let me start by saying that I never thought I'd be sharing this story. But I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs that make even the most unbelievable situations real. I'm Sarah, 32, and up until 6 months ago, I was a corporate event planner in Chicago, living what I thought was my best life with the man of my dreams. James and I met 3 years ago at a charity gala I was organizing. He was this charming 35-year-old pediatric surgeon with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of smile that made everyone in the room feel special. I'd seen plenty of wealthy donors and successful professionals at these events, but James was different. He actually cared about the causes, spent time talking to the kids we were raising money for, and didn't just show up for the photo ops. Our relationship moved fast, maybe too fast, looking back. Within a year, we were living together in his gorgeous Lincoln Park townhouse. I loved how he'd leave little sticky notes on the coffee maker in the morning with awful medical puns, or how he'd surprise me with takeout from my favorite Thai place after a long day of event planning. My best friend Kelly warned me that it all seemed too perfect, but I was too head over heels to listen. I should mention that I knew about Rebecca, his ex-wife. James had been upfront about their divorce 2 years before we met. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and according to James, they'd grown apart because of their demanding careers. He'd always speak about her respectfully, which I took as a sign of his maturity. "We're actually good friends now," he'd say, and like an idiot, I thought that was healthy. The proposal came during a weekend trip to Lake Geneva. James had arranged a private sunset cruise, complete with champagne and my favorite chocolate-covered strawberries. He got down on one knee just as the sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was like a scene from a romance movie, and I was living for it. The ring was stunning, a vintage emerald-cut diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. We'd planned the wedding in just 4 months. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. James was weirdly insistent about handling all the honeymoon arrangements himself, which he said was his special gift to me. He picked this exclusive resort in the Maldives, showing me pictures of overwater bungalows and pristine beaches. I was so touched by his thoughtfulness that I didn't even question why he was being so secretive about the details. The wedding was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. 200 guests at the Chicago Botanical Garden, strings of twinkling lights everywhere, and a cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Rebecca even sent a lovely congratulatory message, which James showed me with this weird proud smile. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found a man who could maintain such a mature relationship with his ex. The honeymoon was scheduled for 3 weeks after the wedding because of James's hospital schedule. He said he needed to arrange coverage for his patients, and it made sense. I spent those 3 weeks floating on cloud 9, organizing our new home together, and dreaming about those Maldivian sunsets we'd soon be watching. If only I'd known then that the sticky notes, the sunset proposal, the perfect wedding, it was all just an elaborate house of cards, waiting for one email to bring it all crashing down. It started unraveling on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 days before we were supposed to leave for the Maldives. I was at work, putting together a pitch for a major corporate client, when my phone buzzed with an email from the Amila Maldives resort. At first, I thought it was just another pre-arrival survey or information packet, you know, the kind of thing fancy resorts send to build anticipation. The email began with, "Dear Mrs. Chen, I hadn't even changed my last name yet. Thank you for selecting our honeymoon ocean pool villa for your special celebration. We're delighted to inform you that due to your husband's platinum elite status, we've upgraded your stay to our exclusive Ocean Lagoon Sunset Villa." I stopped reading. Honeymoon ocean pool villa? James had only shown me pictures of their standard water villas, saying anything fancier was completely booked. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the next line that made my coffee go cold in my hands. "As requested, we've arranged the private beach dinner for 4 on your first evening, and our spa team is prepared for the couple's massage sessions as booked for both couples." Both couples? I read it again, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. They weren't. With trembling hands, I opened my laptop and logged into James's email. Yes, I had his password. He'd given it to me months ago, when I needed to check a dinner reservation he'd made. He'd never changed it, probably never thinking I'd have a reason to snoop. The search for Amila Maldives brought up an entire thread of emails that made me wish I'd never learned to read. There it was, in black and white, a string of correspondence between James and the resort's personal concierge, meticulously planning what could only be described as a double honeymoon. He'd booked connecting villas, arranged couples activities, even requested specific dietary requirements, including a note about Rebecca's shellfish allergy. I sat there, staring at my screen, as more details emerged. James had been coordinating with Rebecca for months. They'd planned everything down to the last detail, which flights to take, deliberately booking seats away from each other to avoid being seen at the airport, when to check in. Rebecca and her friend would arrive first, then James and I would follow 2 hours later, even which restaurants to eat at on which nights to avoid awkward encounters. But the real kick in the teeth? The email where James specifically requested that all charges for both villas be combined into one discrete bill, to avoid any confusion. He'd even created a spreadsheet, my detail-oriented surgeon, breaking down how they'd split the costs. I must have sat there for an hour, reading and rereading the emails, each one feeling like another twist of the knife. My mind kept going back to all those late-night emergency surgeries, the weekends he had to catch up on paperwork, the conferences that ran longer than expected. How many of those times had he actually been with her? The worst part? Rebecca wasn't just going along with this, she was actively helping plan it. There were emails where she suggested activities, recommended restaurants, even joked about how exciting it would be to relive old memories in paradise. They had inside jokes. They had plans. They had a whole secret life that I knew nothing about. I closed my laptop and walked straight into my boss's office. Martha took one look at my face and cleared her afternoon schedule. Over an emergency martini at the bar across the street, I showed her the emails. Her response? "Honey, we're not just going to catch them in the act. We're going to make sure they never forget what happens when you mess with the wrong woman." And that's how Operation Honeymoon Revenge began. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception. I learned from the best, after all, my darling husband. Every morning, I kissed James goodbye, gush about how excited I was for our trip, and ask innocent questions about the resort that he'd answer with practiced ease. He never slipped up, not once. The man deserved an Oscar. But while he was playing his part, I was busy with my own performance. Martha, bless her vengeful soul, helped me execute a plan that would make a soap opera writer blush. First, we contacted the resort's management directly. I explained the situation to their customer relations manager, Priya, expecting corporate neutrality. Instead, I found an ally who was, in her words, personally offended by such a misuse of our honeymoon packages. What happened next still feels like a fever dream. Remember my job as an event planner? Well, those skills came in handy. With Priya's help, I began making my own arrangements, carefully timed room service deliveries, specific housekeeping schedules, and a few special surprises that would make sure our paths crossed in the most spectacular ways possible. But the real breakthrough came when I decided to do some deeper digging into James's life. I hired a private investigator, an expense that made my credit card weep, but as Martha said, "You can't put a price on nuclear-grade revenge." The PI, a former FBI agent named Diana, took less than 48 hours to uncover something that made the honeymoon scandal look like a minor indiscretion. It turned out James and Rebecca had never actually divorced. They'd filed the paperwork, yes, but it was never finalized. Some clerical error that neither of them bothered to follow up on. Which meant that technically, legally, I wasn't married to James at all. Our entire wedding was a sham. But wait, it gets better. Diana discovered that this wasn't just about rekindling an old flame. James and Rebecca had been running a long-con insurance fraud scheme. They'd stage elaborate lives with other people, have lavish weddings, and then file massive insurance claims for lost or stolen wedding gifts. They'd done it twice before me, in different states. The honeymoon? Just their traditional celebration after another successful scam. I sat in Diana's office, looking at photographs, bank statements, and court documents, feeling like I was watching someone else's life unravel. There was even a picture of them at another resort in Bali, taken just 2 months before our wedding, looking very much like the happy couple they truly were. The cherry on top? That vintage grandmother's ring he'd given me? Turned out it was a high-end replica. The original was safely on Rebecca's finger, where it had been all along. I had two choices. I could either fall apart or make sure this would be a honeymoon they'd never forget. I chose the latter. That night, I went home and acted completely normal. I packed my suitcase with all the new beachwear I'd bought, made sure my passport was ready, and even gave James a special pre-honeymoon gift, a new pair of swim trunks. He kissed me and said he couldn't wait to spend 2 weeks in paradise with me. Little did he know, paradise was about to become very, very interesting. The morning of our flight, everything went exactly according to James's meticulous plan, except for one small detail he didn't know about. While he was in the shower, I slipped a little note into his passport holder. Have fun in Villa 112. Love, your wife, well, not legally. He wouldn't find it until we landed. We got to O'Hare 3 hours early because James insisted on being extra careful with international flights. I now knew the real reason. He needed to make sure we wouldn't run into Rebecca and her supposed friend, who was actually her brother Mike, there to make everything look legitimate at check-in. The irony? They were already halfway to the Maldives, having left on an earlier flight. During our layover in Dubai, I watched James check his phone constantly, probably coordinating with Rebecca. He kept making excuses to check his work email in private. At one point, he disappeared for almost an hour, claiming he needed to consult on an emergency surgery back home. I used that time to make a few calls of my own, primarily to the local police in the Maldives, who were very interested in my documentation about the insurance fraud. The final leg of our flight was fascinating. James became increasingly nervous as we got closer to Male International Airport. He was sweating, checking his watch every few minutes, and at one point almost had a panic attack when the flight attendant mentioned something about honeymoon couples getting special treatment at customs. But the real show began at the seaplane terminal. As we waited for our transfer to the resort, I spotted Rebecca and Mike sitting in the corner, pretending to be engrossed in their phones. Rebecca had dyed her hair blonde and was wearing oversized sunglasses, but I'd spent enough time studying her photos to recognize her instantly. James, of course, was carefully positioned with his back to them, making a show of reading a magazine. The seaplane ride was gorgeous, 45 minutes over crystal-clear waters and tiny islands that looked like green jewels scattered across the ocean. I made sure to take lots of pictures, including a few accidental shots that happened to capture Rebecca and Mike in the background. James was too preoccupied with his phone to notice. When we landed at the resort's floating platform, I watched the carefully choreographed dance begin. Rebecca and Mike quickly headed to their villa with one buggy, while another waited to take us to ours. James was about to relax, thinking his plan was working perfectly, when I decided to throw the first wrench into the works. "Oh, honey," I said loudly enough for Rebecca to hear. "I'm so excited to see the Honeymoon Ocean Pool Villa. The hotel emailed me about the upgrade. Isn't it wonderful that we're in Villa 112? And they mentioned something about a dinner for 4 tonight? You shouldn't have kept it a surprise." I'd never seen someone's face lose color so quickly. James stuttered something about a mistake, while Rebecca nearly tripped over her own feet. Mike, to his credit, managed to keep a straight face, but I saw his shoulders shaking with what might have been suppressed laughter. As we were led to our villa, I could see James frantically typing on his phone, probably warning Rebecca about the dinner. Little did they know, I had much bigger surprises planned for the evening. The best part? I'd made sure our villa was the one directly connecting to theirs. The one where every conversation on their terrace would be clearly audible from our plunge pool. The afternoon before the dinner, I watched James come up with increasingly desperate excuses to make phone calls. He'd step onto our villa's deck, not realizing I could hear every whispered argument with Rebecca through our adjoining wall. They were scrambling to figure out how to handle the dinner situation, cancel it, fake food poisoning, anything to avoid being caught. But I had already made sure cancellation wasn't an option. When I'd called the resort management earlier, I'd stressed how important this dinner was for a special announcement I wanted to make. The staff, now in on the whole scheme, assured me they wouldn't accept any changes to the reservation. Around sunset, James suggested we skip the dinner, claiming he wasn't feeling well. I put on my best concerned wife act and insisted on checking his temperature with the digital thermometer I'd brought. "Oh, honey, you're perfectly normal. And we can't miss this. I have something important to tell you." The private beach dinner setup was stunning. For places set at a table right on the sand, tiki torches creating a warm glow, and the sound of waves providing perfect background music. When we arrived, Rebecca and Mike were already there, doing their best to act like strangers. Rebecca had changed her hair again, this time adding a scarf as if that would help. "Oh, you must be the other couple," I exclaimed, extending my hand to Rebecca. "I'm Sarah, and this is my husband James. Well, sort of my husband." The look of confusion on their faces was priceless. Before anyone could respond, I pulled out my iPad and opened a folder labeled Honeymoon Memories. You know what would be fun? A little slideshow I put together. It's got some really interesting pictures, like this one of you two in Bali 2 months ago. And these fascinating insurance claim documents. Oh, and my favorite, the court record showing your divorce was never finalized. The next few minutes were chaos. James knocked over his wine glass. Rebecca started hyperventilating. Mike, surprisingly, burst out laughing. Apparently, he'd had no idea about the insurance scam and thought he was just helping his sister surprise her ex-husband. "I have to say," I continued, casually sipping my champagne, "the level of detail in your planning was impressive. The separate flights, the connecting villas, the coded emails, very thorough. Almost as thorough as the police investigation that's happening right now." That's when we heard footsteps in the sand. 2 local police officers and an Interpol agent approached our table, their badges glinting in the torchlight. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and smiled. "Oh, and I hope you don't mind. I invited a few extra guests for dinner." The expressions on James and Rebecca's faces as they were handcuffed? Better than any wedding photo I'd ever taken. In the chaos that followed, I learned that truth really is stranger than fiction. The police interviews revealed that James and Rebecca's scam went far deeper than even my PI had discovered. They hadn't just done this twice before. They'd pulled similar cons in 5 different countries. The Interpol agent, a sharp-witted woman named Agent Torres, told me they'd been tracking the pattern for months, but could never gather enough concrete evidence. The resort turned into something of a crime scene that night. Staff members were interviewed, security footage was reviewed, and my carefully collected evidence was handed over to the authorities. Mike, who turned out to be genuinely innocent in all this, spent hours giving statements and repeatedly saying, "I can't believe she used me as her cover again." But here's where it gets even more bizarre. While the police were searching their villa, they found dozens of fake passports, multiple sets of wedding rings, and most shockingly, a detailed plan for their next target. They'd already selected a wealthy businessman in Singapore who Rebecca had, accidentally, bumped into at a conference last month. The next morning, I sat on my private deck, watching the sunrise and sipping a $30 coffee that I definitely charged to James's room. Agent Torres joined me, bringing news that made me choke on my overpriced brew. James and Rebecca weren't just con artists. They were part of a larger international ring specializing in romance scams and insurance fraud. My wedding photos had already helped identify 3 other couples involved in similar schemes. The resort manager, clearly mortified by the whole situation, upgraded me to their most exclusive villa, the one usually reserved for visiting royalty. "It's the least we can do," she said, looking both apologetic and somewhat thrilled by all the excitement. "Besides, we've never had an international crime ring busted during a honeymoon before. It's quite good for publicity, actually." I spent the next few days being interviewed by various law enforcement agencies and, surprisingly, several insurance fraud investigators. Apparently, my detailed documentation of everything was exactly what they needed to crack open several cold cases. My event planning skills had inadvertently created the perfect paper trail. The funniest part? Remember those connecting villa walls where I could hear everything? Turns out James and Rebecca had been recording their conversations about future scams, thinking they were being clever by documenting their plans. They didn't realize that the resort's new sound system, which they thought was just for playing music, was picking up every word and saving it to the central server. By day 5 of what should have been my honeymoon, I had become something of a celebrity at the resort. Staff members would bring me extra desserts, guests would ask for selfies, and I even got a standing ovation at the beach bar when I walked in for my evening cocktail. Today, 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new apartment in downtown Chicago, looking at the thank you email from the Maldives resort that started it all. It's framed on my wall, right next to the newspaper article about James and Rebecca's arrest. They're both facing significant prison time. Turns out international fraud doesn't look good on a criminal record. The story made headlines across several continents. Honeymoon sting operation uncovers international fraud ring was my personal favorite headline. I even got calls from several true crime podcasts wanting to feature the story. Martha says I should write a book. She's already got a title picked out. Something blue, something fraudulent, a modern love story. The insurance companies that had been scammed offered me a reward for helping crack the case. It was enough to start my own event planning business, specializing in, ironically, destination weddings. My new tagline? We do background checks. The business is booming. Turns out people really appreciate a wedding planner who's hypervigilant about checking credentials. Mike, Rebecca's brother, and I still keep in touch. He's actually become one of my closest friends. We meet for coffee every month to laugh about how absurd the whole thing was. He's even hired me to plan his upcoming wedding, though he insists on a small, local ceremony with absolutely no international travel involved. That vintage ring? It was actually worth quite a bit. The real one, I mean, not my replica. When they seized James and Rebecca's assets, it was returned to James's grandmother, who was horrified to learn what her grandson had done. She tracked me down and insisted I keep it, saying, "At least one honest person should have worn it." I sold it and donated the money to a charity that helps victims of romance scams. The resort in the Maldives now uses my story in their staff training programs as an example of exceptional customer service in unusual circumstances. They even named a cocktail after me, the Vengeful Bride. It's bright blue, served in a honeymoon suite-shaped glass, and comes with a tiny plastic handcuff as a garnish. Last week, I received a letter from James's lawyer. He's trying to negotiate a lighter sentence in exchange for information about other members of the fraud ring. He included a personal note apologizing for everything, claiming he'd actually fallen in love with me and was planning to come clean. I used the letter as a coaster for my coffee. The wildest part of all this? I'm actually grateful it happened. Not just because it helped break up an international crime ring, or because it led to my successful business, but because it taught me something valuable. Sometimes the biggest plot twists in life lead you exactly where you need to be. Oh, and that 2-week honeymoon I was supposed to have? I stayed for the full duration, alone. Made friends with a group of Australian travelers, learned to scuba dive, and had what the resort staff called the best revenge vacation they'd ever witnessed. Every night, I ordered room service for 2, charged it to James's card, which wasn't canceled until they got back to the States, and enjoyed both portions while watching the sunset from my private infinity pool. Sometimes I think about James and Rebecca sitting in their separate cells, probably planning their next scheme. But mostly, I think about how one thank you email changed everything. Life's funny that way. You think you're heading for a honeymoon in paradise, and instead, you end up taking down an international crime ring. As for me, I'm dating again. Very, very carefully. And yes, I run background checks. Multiple ones. In several countries.